What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the debut album by Avril Lavigne. Basically, this project came out in the late spring of 2002 and it's called Let Go. There was an album that came out before this one that came out in late 2001, which is kind of like a demo album, and that's called B-Sides. I think I'm going to have to review that at some point also, but this was basically seen as basically her debut. Had a number of hits on here, went 7 times platinum, which is pretty outstanding. This is just a particular album that kind of took like North America and just a lot of places by storm just because of Avril Lavigne's personality. I think prior to about like the spring or so of 2002, there just weren't an abundance of like pop artists and kind of pop rock artists that had like the valve as far as what she did. Like Pink came out, but she was more of like punk rock, and she kind of had like a more kind of like tougher edge to her. But I feel like Avril kind of has like this more gothic appeal towards her, which was definitely pretty good around the time, considering the stuff that was kind of popular in the early 2000s, like Blink 182 and Nickelback and like Good Charlotte and some of those bands that were just really making things kind of go punk around that time. But I definitely feel like she crossed over real well, and she got to like the 5th single. This Wikipedia says that she even got to the 6th single, but I'm not so sure if the 6th single actually happened. But I look after it, Avril had a very marketable personality, and she just kind of had that gothic edge just within a pop rock tinge. So she knew how to make pop tunes and cross over to mainstream radio, but then she kept her kind of gothic, kind of moody and emo personality, which is pretty awesome. Is because I mean there were some songs on this album that kind of crossed over into dislike popish, kind of strictly bubblegum pop with a light tinge of dark in there. But for the most part, I would just have to say that Avril was allowed to keep her kind of personality, which is one of the shining things about this project, is just being able to say that Avril's personality, you can tell right by the album cover, looking at those other people on the album cover, seeing her as like a gothic princess and that type of stuff. I just would have to say you knew that she was going to stand out. And that just kind of happens to be a thing. It was definitely a breath of fresh air in the spring of 2002, and it lasted for a while. And Avril Lavigne's even popular today, but I would definitely have to say that this was really refreshing back in 2002 and such, seeing these kind of singles and just the way that she kind of dominated radio as far as that kind of went. So it's good to kind of get those. I'll go ahead and talk about the singles so you can see what I'm talking about here. There were 5 singles, 4 of which charted in the United States. The 5th single, Mobile, was basically released in like Australia, New Zealand, some of those type places. It's too bad that it didn't chart in the United States, but basically the first single is Complicated, and this is a pretty like known song. This is definitely one that's a staple of like 2000s music. I feel like in some fashion or the other, I would definitely have to say that this is a pretty ubiquitous song. It's definitely one that's gotten a lot of plays and airplay and that type of stuff. It's pretty much one of Avril Lavigne's central kind of songs. So this is a popular one. It's a very hazy, kind of autumn makeshift kind of tune. This is definitely one that I would think would get played a lot in like late August, September, October, maybe about as far as November, something like that. Just kind of the more autumn and late summer kind of weather type stuff. Has a very spooky, kind of gothic day commute kind of feel towards it. It's just like the thing I like about this project and some of the singles is just the fact that it's pop music, but it's just not the typical bubblegum. Yeah, it's a different kind of edge towards some of this. I definitely feel like this song catapulted her pretty quickly just to be able to do it. I just would have to say this is not sunshine and butterflies and that type of stuff. And if it is sunshine, it's kind of in a more kind of hazy kind of feel towards it. So it's just a good one to kind of get that. Great single, great overall marketability, and had a great audience. The Hot Topic crowd, emo crowd, and this overall moody kind of crowd as far as that kind of went. Definite great song, great hook. Skater Boy was the 2nd single, and this is kind of, I mean, a lot of these singles by Avril Lavigne are pretty moody and sullen. All of the first 4 singles are really kind of like depressed and kind of funk-like, but this one at least has some degree of like a pop edge. This is probably the most presentable of all the singles in terms of like the most appeal. I mean, it's kind of a depressing song just because of the lyrics in it as to how the relationship doesn't wind up happening. But when you look at the angle from the Skater Boy, it's kind of underneath the impression that he was kind of dumped upon in the beginning of the song. So it's just kind of, I look after this is a nice punk jaunt, definitely a nice pop rock kind of feel towards it. It feels like alternative rock, but it's just an overall punk rock kind of song. Definitely something like the female version of what Blink 182 and Good Charlotte would do. very festive, definitely some warm weather kind of energy. This one's more in like the spring or summer. This is kind of one where it's a little bit jivey a song. Typical, I mean, Avril Lavigne kind of gives off like this more kind of sedate and kind of Avril Lavigne kind of gives off this more sedate and kind of collected kind of energy, but this is definitely a more jivey one that kind of showcases her in a different light. It's just an overall good song, great hook in there, pretty easy to recite and that type of stuff. This would have to say, but it's a different valve compared to the hazy makeshift feel complicated. This one's kind of more of like a punk rock jaunt and just has like a more kind of concert like kind of typical punk rock type feel the early 2000s. I'm With You is the third single, and this is another nice one. This, I mean, Avril's 3 for 3 with the singles, and all of these charted really high. I think all of these were top 5 singles in terms of the Billboard 100. I want to say they even Complicated hit #1. I'm not really sure. But I'm With You is basically like a rosy, kind of wintry ballad. I feel like this is kind of the one where Avril Lavigne was actually able to pull off a ballad that had an attractive feel towards it. And it's a ballad for a funk, but it's very much a gothic winter commute kind of song. When you think of like the winter and that type of stuff, and you need something when you're scraping the snow off your car and just going to work and just the hazy kind of cloudy gray skies and that type of stuff. This just felt like a song that was broadcasted all throughout the winter of 2003, fall of 2002 and stuff. It's really worked in that sense to kind of get that sort of thing. Definitely makeshift. This is more job music, and this was an overall kind of this earworm kind of airplay staple for Avril Lavigne throughout 2003, basically over half a year after the album came out. Just worked perfect for the winter, in my opinion. It's very rosy and wintry, so just like that one. It's actually a kind of down-tempo ballad that's kind of more favorable for me. It's just Avril's personality that really helped pull it off, just because she had kind of that spunk in her charisma. Probably one of the singles I liked the best from this album was Losing Grip. It's a song I've listened to for a while. It's the fourth single, and this is one that has like a more grunge type feel. I looked it up on Wikipedia and it said this is kind of like a grunge type song and maybe like alternative rock. And I just would have to say it's very slanted, kind of distorted kind of tune. I really like the beat on here. It just really gives off like this hazy kind of dusky kind of feel towards it. Definitely feels like an evening party tune. It's kind of sullen, and Avril's personality kind of shines through. I mean, the thing about Avril is the fact that she doesn't have like an overt amount of party tunes on her. Her personality is kind of like a female version of like Keanu Reeves, or it's just kind of where she's kind of very moody, and it's just the aspect that she doesn't really cut loose enough to really be able to see her let her hair down and have some party tunes. But I do feel like this is a decent party tune. It does have that kind of feel towards it, but it's just very like it's just very kind of caught in the emotions as far as that kind of goes. But I do like the concept. It just has great production for like a kind of dusky, kind of autumn kind of jam as far as that kind of went. Perfect little September, October kind of party session in that sort of sense. I also really liked Avril Lavigne's vocals on like the bridge of Losing Grip, and the hook is pretty awesome too. So it's just some good stuff on there. Mobile is the fifth single, and this is one that kind of is a little bit hazy, but also kind of has more pep to it. This one's kind of like Skater Boy, but just not quite as rousy. I feel like it's an alternative rock. It's an alternative rock commute kind of song, but it has a very brisk and social city traverse kind of feel towards it. It just feels like kind of traversing through the city, whether by car or by foot, just kind of going along and just kind of seeing some of the sights and just kind of being throughout the city and the buildings and the skyscrapers or wherever you see a bunch of buildings and that type of stuff as far as that kind of went. I do like this song just because you can tell by the song title Mobile that it's just kind of more kind of on the go and that type of stuff. But it just is kind of, it's not quite a party tune from Avril Lavigne, but it is relatively social. I feel like this is one that you probably could play. This is not necessarily a party tune by Avril Lavigne, but I feel like this has enough energy and briskness about it to be able to say that it's a decent social bop. I just feel like with Avril's energy and her lyrics, she's not really too concentrated on being recreational, but it is a pretty nice jam. So I would have to say Losing Grip and Mobile are both nice ones for that. But yeah, so this is just a very sullen album. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you right off the bat that Avril seemed like she was really going through like some sort of funk and that type of stuff, and it works for it. I mean, she handles this personality type well, but there's not really much as far as like a tune. Like in terms of like the energy of Skater Boy or like the briskness of Mobile, there's not a bunch of songs on here that just kind of have like a random song where Avril's going to play like some beer pong or like showcase some of her interests as far as what she wants to do. It's very caught up in like relationship as far as like the concept of not being satisfied, and I look at the concept as far as that kind of went, that it's moody. It is good for its accomplishments as far as getting to work, summer, autumn, winter, something like that, and it's kind of the concept of the occasional, just like brief peppiness. Maybe some of Avril's friends try to get her to do it, but for the most part, it's just kind of caught up and just being kind of sullen. I think it's not like this album's bad. It's going to get a pretty rave score, but it's just something to notice with the mood of this album. A lot of this is kind of more about the feelings that you get from it more so than like the the jive of wanting to go crazy. It's not like that's bad. I mean, it's just different situation to know going in that that's kind of the concept that it doesn't have as that's kind of thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and list the 9 songs out of 13 I recommend. I like quite a bit on here. I mean this album connected with me quite a bit. Avril has an outstanding personality, and it's kind of underneath the context that Avril has an outstanding personality, and it's underneath the context that a lot of this just made easy connections. And if we could have gotten like those rave numbers and seen her really kind of have like some crazy cuts, that would be about the only thing I could really have too much more to ask for. So the 9 songs I recommend would be Complicated, Skater Boy, I'm With You, Losing Grip, Mobile, Unwanted, Naked, Too Much to Ask, and Anything But Ordinary. So to talk about the 4 songs, apart from the 5 singles I listed, Unwanted is a really nice one. This is another hazy makeshift kind of song, very similar to Complicated. This kind of gothic autumn pop. I would have to say it's another one very, very, very similar to Complicated. Another song that's similar to Complicated. Another song that's very similar to Complicated, apart from Unwanted, is Anything But Ordinary. This one's a little bit brisker, but still kind of foggy, dusk-like makeshift. Very radio-ready hook on here. This is one that probably could be performed a lot, I would have to say. This would be a great album cut to get on the radio, despite the fact that it's not a single. This has that real kind of popish kind of feel towards it. It's very emo, gothic kind of makeshift, but it works. It's just a more album cut version of Complicated. And I feel like that's kind of the same thing with Unwanted, but that one's just a little bit more hazy and a little bit like a shade or two darker than Complicated, a little bit less chart heavy. But I do feel like a lot of these hooks really work. I mean, Avril really has the idea down as far as the moody and kind of gothic kind of feel of like pop rock and being able to do it. So that's a great thing to be able to have that. Naked is kind of gothic makeshift. This is very eerie in the production. This has a really kind of distorted kind of vibe towards it. Very similar to Losing Grip, but just a little bit more atmospheric and hazy about it. But I just would have to say that that's definitely a nice one. It's a very compelling song. It's a nice song to tack on to the end. I really like that concept of getting some of these because I really feel like some of the spots that Avril shines really well is songs like Unwanted, Naked, and Losing Grip. Those are just some of the darkest songs on here, but they really connect and they just have like that edge that this is kind of original. But then there's another kind of dark song on here that's Too Much to Ask, and this one is kind of like a darker version of Complicated. This is really kind of like sullen and brooding in a lot of ways. I mean, Avril doesn't brood too much. She may be upset, but it's not to the point where she's like really bent out of shape. But this one, Too Much to Ask, really feels like she's bent out of shape and really just kind of like completely brooding on this song. It's a very darker version, but it is makeshift. I mean, she accomplished the concept of being able to have these songs chart, but maybe it is a little bit too sullen for like the radio, but it's not like it's a bad song. It's just good. I feel like there are some songs on here that I feel like it's too bad that these don't get airplay, despite the fact that most of the time radio only plays singles. But some of these, I don't know where you'd hear them. Maybe you'd hear them at like more gothic places, maybe Hot Topic would be a good place to hear some of these, and like other spots like that, just darker, kind of more moody kind of shopping mall stores. And just I don't know if like places like Target and Walmart would play this sort of music, but it is good enough to say that some darker spots could probably do it, especially in the autumn. So it'd be great music to hear. So it's just good to kind of get those. Basically, to talk about the songs I didn't enjoy, there were only 4 of those, and I just kind of feel like most of them were just kind of in the middle. Songs like Tomorrow, Things I'll Never Say, My World, and Nobody's Fool. I mean, all of these just kind of had like a more pop rock appeal where they just tried to turn them into makeshift kind of pop, trying to make Avril Lavigne into like a version of like Kelly Clarkson with just a lot more of like bubblegum pop. I mean, she retained like maybe 5 or 10 or 15% of her dark appeal towards it, but I just feel like putting Avril Lavigne, who typically seems like someone who wears black and red a lot, into like something of like pink and yellow or something like that. It's a little bit more poppy and just more pastel colors and that type of stuff. This didn't really fit her image. And I feel like it kind of bogged down the album to kind of see her in like this more pop princess kind of tone when she really carved out her lane pretty effectively with these gothic kind of makeshift songs that she did. So I feel like they just kind of stick out. I mean, Avril even raps on the song Nobody's Fool, which is pretty solid. Nice raps, Avril, for doing that. But I just would have to say, like, I mean, the raps fit her. I would like to see these on like a darker song to see if she could have done that on like Losing Grip or Anything But Ordinary or something like that. But most of these kind of bubblegum pop type tunes just don't really suit her and they're just out of character for her. But yeah, I'm going to give this album me liking 9 out of 13 songs. I'm going to give this album like a 9 out of 10. I feel like that's pretty much that good. I just would have to say I would almost give it an 8.75, but the fact that it had 5 singles and I liked all 5 of them, just went 7 times platinum, very popular, nice image, nice hooks, nice album cuts, and nice overall like aesthetic that it had. I feel like this is definitely a 9 out of 10 album to say that the quality is really off the Richter. So the social score, I'll go ahead and give like a 6 out of 10 though, because these singles are good, and maybe with you and like a couple close friends, especially if you're female, to be able to say how some of that works. But like I said, there's just not, I mean, there may be like work tunes and relatable tunes that a lot of folks have heard, but there's just not really like the Friday, Saturday night kind of tunes, Thursday night even. I think apart from Mobile, Losing Grip, and maybe like Unwanted or some of those, there's just not an abundance of kind of real shindig kind of songs. Avril just didn't have that focus as far as that kind of went, but I do feel like it's decent and it does have some gothic kind of images towards it, which may work. So in terms of the future, like Avril Lavigne dropped an album in 2022, which I reviewed, which is called like Love Sucks. She dropped like a deluxe edition of Love Sucks in mid late 2022. So I'm gonna have to review that. But there are some other Avril albums I'm gonna have to get to, but for yeah, this is definitely hot ticket here.